Hi everyone, happy Valentine's Day. So I thought I'd do this video on a day in the life as a clinical psychologist, given that I am a budding clinical psychologist. So I actually just got my PhD in clinical psych in 2021, and it was unfortunate that we didn't get to have our in-person graduation during that year. And it's actually scheduled for this year in May, and I did graduate from a private university out in Los Angeles, California. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm excited because I like new beginnings, right? And granted, I actually accepted a full-time position working as a clinical psychologist at a hospital here in New York City. I actually work for the state. So in this video, I'm going to just talk about what my life is like as a clinical psychologist. I'm going to walk you guys from through the beginning of the day all the way down to the end. And if you guys don't mind, I'm going to do my typical routine of lighting my incense, given that this is how I stay grounded. At least one of the ways that I like to stay grounded. And I use this also as aromatherapy too. So I love it. This is actually Frank and Myrrh scented incense. So where should I begin? Like I said, I actually accepted this full-time position 3 months after finishing my pre-doc internship. So I did my pre-doc internship here in New York City as well. I knew I wanted to move back to New York. I actually went to school out in LA for my doctoral studies, and the program is a 5-year program accredited by the American Psychological Association. It was actually 4 years out there in LA, right? And then my 5th year, I came back to New York in the brink of the pandemic. Y'all, I moved back April 1st here to New York City. And it was a strange time when I moved back. Granted that it was at the top, right? It was like the pandemic was fresh because it was a month after COVID had hit and things began to shut down. So when I came back to New York, it was like a ghost town, literally. No one really was outside, and for me, it was just a time to really kind of get my feet back into the trenches of New York City, because I had been away for a while, though I would visit New York annually, right, from LA, but it's nothing like just finally settling back in and making New York my home, which, like I said, I always knew that I wanted to move back upon completion of my PhD studies. And so got back here. I made a video on how I actually got a chance to experience New York through living at different Airbnbs. So that's a whole nother video. But that's what it was like. And then I did my pre-doc internship, which I actually completed September 2021. So I gave myself like a 3-month kind of hiatus, little break. And then I ended up accepting the full-time position. And now I'm working as a clinical psychologist. Granted, I am not licensed yet, though. I'm working towards my licensure hours now during my first year at the hospital. So I am under the supervision of a couple of actually several, more than a couple. I have seemed like I have so many supervisors, but that's a whole nother story. So I would say my job is pretty interesting. Granted, I do work at a psychiatric hospital that houses women and men who are suffering from severe mental illness. Severe mental illness being schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorders, bipolar. Those are pretty much the predominant diagnoses that we see, though there's a significant portion of the patient population there who also suffer from personality disorders. So the population that I work with in particular is a group of men, go figure, And I say this because that seems to be my niche, right? Like, it seems to be the population I keep somehow finding myself working with. Granted, when I first entered the field of mental health post bachelor's degree in 2006, I was working on an all-male adolescent unit, right? It was children and adolescents, but just working at a residential treatment facility. And my unit that I worked on, it was actually cottages, right, like houses, but it was a lockdown facility, was working with all boys. So I find myself back again, kind of coming full circle, working with all men now, and they're mostly African American men. I would say melanated, right? Because they're not just African American, they're actually Caribbean and, you know, some African American men. So they're black men, and I find it interesting, and this is kind of what inspired me to do this video, is that today, today actually, obviously is Valentine's Day, but we are in the middle of Black History Month, and I actually did a group with the men today. So I actually have a ward. My caseload is a ward of 24 men, right? At the hospital, there are different wards, or as you can call them, units, right? What we call them, wards. And yeah, I have a caseload of 24 men. And so my job description consists of a multiplicity of different roles or responsibilities, right, or duties. So I do groups, which is a big portion of what I do, and I actually love doing this, and this is something I communicated when I was on my interview, is that I like doing groups. I like the group dynamic. I like just sitting and talking with people. So clearly, right? So that's a big portion of what I do, and I'm about to get into tell you guys, like, the group that I did today in the middle of Black History Month. It's interesting. So aside from doing groups, I also do individual therapy. I do treatment plans, and that is a big portion of what I do. I do comprehensive treatment plans, and then there's this thing called periodic treatment plan review, which is done like every 60 to 90 days, depending on how long the patient has been in the hospital. So it's pretty involved in terms of writing a treatment plan, because it basically speaks to what the patient is there for, right? And it's not only focused on psychiatric issues that the patient is experiencing, but also any physical, medical conditions, right? And so it kind of goes into what the team looks like that I work with, right? It's not just me as a psychologist. On the team is also a psychiatrist. There's a chief psychiatrist above the psychiatrist. There is a nursing department that consists of the head of nursing, and then there are nurses up under the head, right, of the supervisor, the nurse supervisor. Then there's dietitian, social worker, there's a treatment team leader, and there's a medical doctor. Who am I missing? And there are direct care staff, basically, that work directly with the patients, right, and kind of oversee their day-to-day activities. And so it's an interesting dynamic considering it's interdisciplinary, and it consists of a group of people that come from many different various backgrounds, right? So I'm of the background of psychology, and I work very closely with other people who represent other backgrounds, mostly rooted in medicine and the sciences, right? Working with nurses and the medical doctors and the dietitian, and then the social worker. So that's that, right? And so going back to the group, right, which I said is like a big part of what I do at the hospital, I run groups. I run about 1 to 2 groups a day, which is not that heavy, right, when you think of in terms of caseload. It's not that intense, right? But it can be, depending on what comes to group, right? What is brought inside the room. For me, anything is grist for the mill. So given that we are in the middle of COVID plays a big role of kind of shaping what programming looks like, within many different agencies, right? Not just the hospital where I work at. So it also shapes basically how many patients get to attend group. So on a good day, aside from COVID, I think they were doing 10 to 12. Sorry, I hate when my video chops up like that. But I think they were doing like 10 to 12 individuals that get to attend a group. But now it's more reduced given COVID, as long as there's social distancing. For me, I like to kind of keep it open, right? So it's like, come all, right? Anyone can kind of, fall in the group and sit down. But I tend to take more of a psychodynamic approach in interacting with the individuals there. And so it's a very interesting, I would say, mixture of individuals that are on my ward and that tend to come to my groups. And I like to incorporate music to kind of build rapport and get to know my patients. But today we did an interesting group talking about Black history, well-known and unknown facts, right? And so one of the songs that was played in the group was a song by Bob Marley, Redemption Song. And we were listening to it, and for me, I like to ask the patients, like, what does the song bring out for you, right? What does it mean for you? And it was brought up that the song represents freeing oneself mentally. And I'm like, yes, this is the hallmark of the work that I am called to do as an African-centered psychologist. And granted, like I said, the majority of the men there are melanated men. I like to work within the realm of Black identity, acculturation, and combating, obviously, white supremacy. And so as they began to dissect what the song meant, we began to talk about, okay, well, what does that look like, right? Emancipating one's mind from the stronghold, right, of slavery, psychological slavery. I'm like, okay, there's different ways to do that. How can one achieve that goal? And then it was brought up that one needs to educate, right? The Negro needs to self-educate himself to free himself from that psychological bondage. And I had to interject to say, there's a Black female psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing who indicated that in order to overcome white supremacy, you know what she said that needs to take place? And given that I work with predominantly Black men, I couldn't resist. I thought this was interesting. I said that basically, quote unquote, what she says in her book, The ISIS Papers, which kind of raised a bit of a red flag when I was doing my dissertation, because I did quote Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in my dissertation several times. And of course, my chair, it's a white woman, right? Now, I've already defended my dissertation, right? Been there, done that. That's done. But it's interesting to see people's reaction to discussions surrounding obviously very controversial matters. And so even then, right, it was kind of like a bittersweet moment. Sweet in a sense that, yes, I'm delving my hands deep into something that I'm fit for the challenge, right? That this is what I'm called to do. So this is what I feel very passionate about, but it's bitter in the sense that, of course, it doesn't sit well with everyone. And in their discomfort, and in my comfortability in being able to, take on this difficult subject matter head on, it sometimes creates tension and unease. And today, I find it interesting that one of the gentlemen in the group said he disagrees with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory, right, on how essentially white men are genetically inferior to black men, and that's the reason why they create the system of white supremacy. I mean, this is, quote unquote, this is what her theory states in her book, The ISIS Papers. And it makes sense when you think about it from that perspective and how to combat that, right? So there's genetic inferiority. And I talked about this too in the context of cuckolding and white male submissives, right? And why they want to invite black bulls to sexually satisfy their wives, because not only are they biologically and physically inferior, but, you know, they themselves have agreed that they are genetically inferior. And it's funny that I got an email a couple days ago, I haven't addressed it yet, but a white man actually confirming Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory. And I could incorporate that here in this video, but that's just its own separate video. So you guys come back for that. But it was a white man who emailed me a couple days ago, and he was just like co-signing, saying, yes, white people are genetically inferior. So with that theory, she's saying that because the white man is genetically inferior, he had to create a system of white supremacy to put other races at a disadvantage, right? Economic, really, you know, of course, building a system such that it runs on the economics, right? And the political structure is kind of interwoven within the economics, and one's survival obviously depends on all of these intersections of the economy, the politics. It impacts one's ability to be able to fend for himself, to survive, basically, essentially, right? And so she says that to that end, in order to combat that racially oppressive system, all black men have to do is pull their penis out and fuck the white woman, right? And to impregnate the white woman, to dilute the white race, and essentially and ultimately annihilate the white race, right? So I mentioned this in the group, and it's interesting to see what their reactions were, right? Many found it very shocking, like, oh, interesting. But one guy was like, no, I disagree because, I disagree with that theory, he says, because, why? Disagrees because white people are good, right? Or at least some are. Not all white people are bad, right? So one shouldn't have the idea to kill off white people, because there are white people who have done good by him, right? And not just him, but this is kind of like a consensus of a group of black people, right, that share in that same belief. And I'm like, aha, you have a point. So this is the kind of work that I do within my job, and it's interesting how it plays out. So going back to this treatment team dynamic and how I work amongst people from other disciplines, my treatment team leader, who is also a social worker, she had asked, you know, what are we doing for Black History Month with the patients, right? In terms of our therapeutic groups. And I said, to be quite honest, I actually incorporate this in my day-to-day, right, my day-to-day work with patients, right? It's not, for me, it's not an idea of trying to kind of compartmentalize the infusion of educating, you know, the patients on Black history or Black culture and appreciation of one's identity. This is something that I do, like, consistently throughout my work. This is my work, right? But I appreciate the place where I work, the agency where I work, that they make a conscious effort to integrate these things, especially during Black History Month, throughout, the context of the therapeutic activities that take place within the agency. So that's one part of the work that I do, a very significant part in doing groups and individual therapy. I also do psychological evaluations for patients who, present with issues that need to be explained, right? So, given that the population I work with are men, many of the men, it ranges, right, in age, in terms of, men 18 years old up to fucking 80 years old, right? And so a significant number of the men are actually above a certain age, right? They are essentially like elders. And with age comes a decline in one's cognitive ability, right, and their deficits, and that impacts one's ability to be able to function efficiently in their day-to-day life. And so to look at, what's contributing to that and where they stand, within that paradigm of their cognitive ability, it warrants kind of psychological testing. And so that's something I also do. And I pride myself in the work that I do, to be honest. Like, I every aspect of the work, for me, it's just the connection that I make with the patients that I work with. I take it very seriously. And just even the brief interactions, right? So of course, there are some patients who don't necessarily come to groups, right? Or I don't see for individual therapy. But even just in the encounters that I face in working with the guys, it's interesting. And I know you guys probably are wondering, okay, well, how did they get there, right? Like, most are actually there involuntarily. That's really how they get there, right? They got committed there. No one really usually goes just to a hospital and say, oh, I just want to sign up and I want to commit myself. No, they're there involuntarily. Now, there's a thing where they can actually agree to take on a voluntary status, right? But a lot of them are there because a judge put them there. And alongside that, a lot of them are there because they committed a crime. And in the context of committing that crime, they were deemed to have mental defect, right? Which they would usually call the insanity plea. So some of them have done some very serious crimes against, humanity. We're talking about murder and murder, right? So it makes the work really exciting. And for me, I take the approach of not necessarily going to a patient's chart at first. I don't usually go to a patient's chart at first, right? I like to get to know them for myself. Now, of course, the chart is there and it has information that, is part of their record. It has documentation that gives you an idea of, okay, how others perceive them, all right, and what has took place in that person's history. But I would like to get to know the person for myself. Now, of course, that comes with, pros and cons. I say that because there's a patient who I work with on a different ward, because sometimes we're asked to do coverage. So this is another part of kind of my role as a clinical psychologist. We're asked to do coverage for other psychologists on other wards, and I've done that. I've actually worked on a COVID ward. They had to open up a triage ward, and I provided coverage working with COVID positive patients, right? And it's funny because my colleague, I was in a group text, and she was like, Danielle, what the hell are you doing working on a COVID ward? And I'm like, according to how they see it, at the hospital, every patient deserves to be treated fairly, right? And with that equal and fair treatment, they deserve to also receive all the same services everyone else has, including psychological treatment. So that's why I was there. But I worked on other wards too. have a ward kind of dedicated to certain demographics, certain ethnic demographic of people, Asian, Spanish, and, you know, borderline female patients, for example. And so I was working on a different ward, and, you know, there's this guy coming to my group. I didn't, you know, think to read his chart, because that's not the approach that I take. Presents as very pleasant. And then come to find out, he's there for murder of a relative. And so you have those kinds of situations. You know, for me, that's really not important. It's important, yes, to kind of, I guess, set the context, right? But a person is more than what they've done. That's how I like to look at people and connect with people, right? So I just take a totally different approach, and I get it. I work with other people from other disciplines. That obviously kind of sometimes sets a divide in how we approach situations, or how we interact and how we treat the patients, which can serve to its own benefit. But at the same time, even within that difference of discipline, right, is what we also bring as unique individuals, right, to our roles, to our jobs, and working at the hospital with the patients, right? And of course, you know, me being an African-centered person, being me an African-American woman, I bring to the table my own unique set of attributes. And so do other people, right? And based on our own personal experiences too. So I just find that interesting. You know, and working in this field can be very challenging, right? Because I try to take more of a non-judgmental approach, not only in working with my clients, my patients, but also in working amongst other people as a team. Because we're not going to think alike, right? We may agree on some things, but a lot of times we just disagree. And I like to be curious to see, oh, well, what drives that person's perspective and how they relate to, you know, a particular patient. So I think that's interesting. Now, in terms of the structure of my day usually begins with me waking up to an alarm clock. Sometimes I don't wake up to an alarm clock. Sometimes I just wake up before the alarm clock. But more often than not, I'm waking up to an alarm clock because I love my sleep. I sleep well, okay? I have to emphasize that. Sleep is really important to me, and so is food. So in my bedroom, I do not have a television. I don't believe in having a TV inside my bedroom. Yeah, it's just my bed and that's it, and the walls and paintings, of course, and goddesses and gods looking down at me that I painted, and feminine energy surrounding me. But it's a sacred space. My entire space where I live is a sacred space. That to me is very important. I don't wear shoes in my place, right? So I kind of set the tone. I set the energy field within my space. It's my temple. And so when I go to bed, I'm gone. I'm knocked out to the world. Yeah, I'm in a totally different dimension. And I know, you know, there's a thing where people suffer from insomnia, right? And they have trouble sleeping. But for me, no, I can't have trouble sleeping. I mean, I can't given the nature of my work, right? But work aside, I just need my sleep personally, you know. I value sleep. But yeah, can you imagine, given the nature of my work, having trouble sleeping? That would not be a good mix. And so, yeah, I think it's a practice, right? We talk about like self-care. And self-care is not something you just try to hurry up and do, because you're starting this really important position as a psychologist, right? Or for people who are medical doctors, whatever your profession is, when you're working with people, right? It's a very intricate, delicate role, right? You have people's lives in your hands. It's not to be taken lightly. So it's important, yes, that you take care of yourself first and foremost, right? As a provider, That's always been important to me, and it's not something that you just hurry up and do because, oh, you start this role. It's a practice, right? It's a discipline. It's something that you have to work at, right? So I find it interesting when people say, well, how do you manage to be a psychologist or have multiple roles, and how do you get through this difficult time, especially with COVID, right? And I'm like, it's not something that you just wake up and do. It's just something that I've always been doing as a practice. So it comes very natural to me. Just taking care of myself. And so, yeah, I wake up at 5:45 every morning. I do my hygiene, just like everyone else. Actually, take that back. Before I do my hygiene, honestly, I check my email. And I check my bank account religiously, right? It's just something I do every morning. I check my email, check my bank account, just making sure things are where it's supposed to be. I do number two. That's part of it, right? Like while I'm checking my email and my bank account, I'm taking a shit. I'm just being very frank with you guys. I'm taking a shit. And then I actually, of course, wash my hands, do my hygiene, like brushing my teeth and all of that. I pick out what I'm going to wear in the morning. It doesn't take long for me to pick out what I'm going to wear. Usually it's something very colorful. I charge my phone. I put my phone in the charger. And what else? After I pick what I'm going to wear, I get my ass in the shower and wash my ass. Then I get dressed. So I leave the house. Takes about 45 minutes, I would say, for me to do all of that. Then I leave the house and I'm on my way. And I get there. I start my day at 8 o'clock. All right, I work from 8 to 4:30. Doesn't seem like a long shift. It goes by really quickly, to be honest with you. Before you know it, it's just like, oh, it's time to go, right? And so I like that. I try not to take my work home with me, right? And that's more of a figurative statement, right? Figuratively, right? Or even psychologically, like taking issues home with you that you've dealt at work. No, I leave that shit there because I'm done. I'm off work. And thankfully, and that's why I kind of set the foundation when I started this video and I was talking about my pre-doc internship. Because my pre-doc internship, yes, it was here in New York, but it was more of a hybrid position. So I was working full-time with getting a stipend. So definitely not the salary I'm making now because it was a stipend. I was still a student in my PhD program. But because of COVID, was working home 80% of the time. Okay. While I was working at home, of course, I was doing evaluations virtually. I was seeing clients for individual therapy. And then when I went into the office that one day out of the week, I was doing cognitive testing, IQ testing, autism screening. Pretty intense work. Doing psychological evaluations for children with autism. And it's behavioral, like the presentation is like in your face autism, right? Behaviorally. So that was that, and given that I did 80% of the work from home, I felt a bit relieved to start this position working fully in person, okay? Because, yeah, it can get kind of grayish, right? Like, not the lines can get pretty blurred, not knowing, okay, where does work begin? Where does your personal life begin, right? Or where does work end and your personal life begin? When you're working from home, because you're working at home. Now, home is supposed to be a place where, this is your sanctuary, you're at peace, you're not working. But yeah, I didn't like that blurredness of the lines there, the boundaries, I don't know, it was weird, but I got through that year. nonetheless. And so now that my work is fully in person, yes, those boundaries are very clear and distinct. My work is my work, and yeah, I'm not thinking about patients when I'm not there. I have no reason to. I pick it back up when I get back in the office, right? But as long as I'm here, my mind is on other things, painting and traveling and going to events across New York City, and dating. So, what else? I think that's pretty much it. Like, that's my day as a psychologist. I mean, there are meetings, yeah. So I forget to mention, so in terms of the structure when I'm at work. So when I get to work, first thing I do is I get settled in. I put my things down. And of course, I eat my breakfast. I don't eat breakfast at home. I eat my breakfast at my job. I eat my breakfast. I check my emails. I get my things set for the day, like checking my calendar, making sure that I'm on top of everything. If I have any important meetings, like with supervisors, I actually do. So I'm being supervised by 3 licensed psychologists, 2 of which are female. 1 is a forensic psychologist, which I appreciate, given that if I do want to go the route of forensic psychology, voila, like I have a supervisor who is that, and I could easily go that route if I choose to. I'm actually being invited to like the hospital forensic committee meetings, so I really appreciate having that exposure and that experience in that realm, given that there are a good number of our patients who they call them 330-20 CPL, criminal procedure law patients, meaning that they actually committed a crime, felony, a very violent offense that got them there at the psychiatric hospital where I work. So yeah, I have meetings. I'm checking my calendar, making sure, okay, I have my day set out for, like, the structure set out for what I'm going to do, what I can expect to do that day, because there are all kinds of meetings, right? The consistent meeting that I have every day in the morning is round. So that's where everyone from all the disciplines, we meet together as a team and talk about any kind of important issues on the table for the patients. It can range from anything, right? It's all kinds of issues that pop up. Some patients may be on one-to-one observation for active suicidal ideation, number of things. So we talk about that, we table that, and there are weekly discharge round meetings that happen usually at the end of the week. There are hospital-wide round meetings. We talk about like hospital-related issues, all kinds of meetings, supervision meetings, of course. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm trying to see what else did I miss. That's pretty much what my day looks like in a nutshell. Aside from, of course, writing notes. So the interesting thing about my work here versus other places in the role of as a psychologist is that I don't necessarily have to write individual notes for my sessions, right, when I meet with clients individually. I don't write psychotherapy notes. I do write it for myself, but not necessarily for documentation or billing purposes for the hospital where I work. But we are required to write monthly notes on what the patient's progress is with respect to their treatment plan, right? Each treatment plan consists of, goals, objectives. The goals, I think I mentioned, are kind of broken down into 3 different subtypes. So there's psychiatric, there's the medical, and then most have substance abuse goals because a lot of patients have a history of substance abuse. So that's it, right? Treatment planning, which is pretty intense. And then, meeting with part of the part of the, and I'm having this in my stomach because I just ate. I just ate and I can feel my food digesting. But yeah, part of the morning rounds is sometimes also incorporating meetings with the patients too and reviewing their treatment plan with them. So having said that and considering my stomach, namaste. Woosah. I'm going to end this video. But feel free to drop your comments below, you guys. Share this video. Inspire younger people, especially African American men and women who are interested in pursuing this field, right? It's interesting because there's a need for more African American psychologists, given that we only make up 2% of all psychologists here in America. 2%, last time I checked. That's a very low number. We are underrepresented significantly within this profession. So I think that's where the need comes from of being African-centered, right? And attuned to the issues that impact African people within America. But there's more to say. This is just, I think, maybe a preload, right, to my work as an African-centered clinical psychologist here in New York. I do have a whole playlist that I created. I think I entitled it Life as a Clinical Psychologist in New York. I think that's what I entitled it. Something of that nature. You guys can go check that out. This video will be a part of that. But yeah, I do want to create a kind of a series on just the day in the life as a clinical psychologist, though like I won't be sharing like too many intimate details, you know, pertaining to patients necessarily, but it would just be my perspective on like what it's like for me, right? You know, being in this role and working with the population that I work with and working within the setting in which I work with, right? Because every setting that a psychologist is different, right? When I worked at the prison setting in California, that was much different than where I work now. Similar though, because they're both working within the state system, but it's just, it looks different. The population is different. And they asked me, how is it different? Well, so, I mean, it's similar though in some ways, right? Like in terms of the functioning level, I would say. The functioning level of the patients I work with now, they're there for a reason. So it's a reason why they are hospitalized, right? And sometimes they are hospitalized for too long and become institutionalized. But many of them struggle with being able to care for themselves, right? In a healthy and productive way, consistently, right? So they need that structure. They need that support of a treatment team. You know, you need someone kind of prompting them to get up and take care of their ADLs and do their hygiene and kind of monitor their medication, making sure they're taking their medication, right? And having a therapist and psychologist to talk to. They need that. Versus at the prison, those guys, and it was actually youth age 15 to 25, they were more higher functioning, right? I've done IQ tests there, and they actually score within the average range versus the patients that I work with. I would say there are some that score within the average, low average range. Some kind of borderline. But, yeah, for the most part, yeah, the guys at the prison, definitely higher functioning. Believe it or not, criminals are kind of smart, even though they're dumb, right, for getting caught, doing the shit they were doing. But, yeah, they're pretty crafty. And mischievous, right, at what they do. So that's that. But yeah, working with criminals, people who have like committed armed robbery and murder, and you know, they are not necessarily hearing voices. They're just there because they fucked up and did something illegal. Versus where I work, you know, working with guys who, you know, actually hallucinate. They have auditory hallucinations or delusions, right? So I'm going to end this video because my stomach is calling me. I think the toilet is calling me too. But feel free to drop your comments below. And if you have like a question that you would like to share with me, right? To reach me directly. You don't want the public necessarily to know that you're asking. Feel free to email me. My email address is attached to my YouTube channel. You can just go to my website and use the contact page. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Happy Black History Month and happy Valentine's Day. I don't have a Valentine yet. I'm my own Valentine. And I'm kind of like gotten very content with singlehood. Though there is come a time when I'm going to procreate. There will come a time. That time is coming sometime soon. Well, then I'll catch you guys later. Love you guys. Oh, my finger, listen, it's funny because I usually do this, or I should use this hand here, because you guys can see this finger is, I think I sprained it, right? So that's why it's bent. My middle finger. So I was trying to do this, and it looked like I was throwing up the European peace sign. That's not what I'm doing, so I'll just use this. Yeah, I did sprain it. It's sore, and I'm not able to. Yeah, it's messed up. It's out of operation right now. But I'll catch you guys later. Drop your comments below. Love you guys. Bye.